Some of these slides I saw for the first time 30 minutes ago, so bear with me a little bit. I also wouldn't have worn a hoodie if I remembered that it was today. But good to see everybody. I love talking about my work. I've been doing this for 16 years now. Who's written in a Waymo? Great. Oh, that's a lot more than the last time I asked the question. You may or may not know Stanford has a no outdoor robot policy, which is why you never see them here. Would be nice to change that at some point. I don't know who's in charge of that, but that's why you never see our robots on Stanford campus. I think it was motivated by like the sidewalk delivery robots or something, which has been gunking up some other college campuses. Anyway, all right, well, let me get started. So as you know, I work at Waymo. We build robot cars. It's actually going pretty well. I've been doing this for 16 years. The way I like to summarize this is for the first 12 or so years, this was a fun science project to work on. It wasn't clear to me that it was going to work, but I was happy to work on it. They were paying me. We got to work on cool stuff. It was fun to talk about at parties. Now it actually works, right? And we've now entered a phase where we have a really compelling product. People seem to like it a lot. It's hard to get one in San Francisco. They cost too much because they're hard to get. That's not something we want, but it's kind of the supply and demand balance we've got now. And now it's a matter of scaling it out and going across the world, getting to work in more places, which is a great place to be. So I'm going to walk you through some of what we've done, a little bit about the AI side of things. All right. So first off, the original motivation for doing all this, the driving is just really dangerous. Over 1 million people die each year in automobile fatalities. A lot of that is in the developing world where they don't have great road infrastructure. It's a lot of pedestrians being hit by cars, but we also have a lot of deaths in the United States. We hit a low in the mid-2010s, and it's now been creeping back up. No one's quite sure why. There are a lot of theories about this. So it seems to be going up at night. It seems maybe to be due to larger vehicles, but no one's quite sure what's going on. But what we do know is that humans are the cause of almost all of these accidents. I mean, you could, in theory, have a rock fall on your car, and that's not your fault. But in general, every automobile fatality is the result of human inattention or mistake. Robots and computers and AI are good at not doing that, right? And so that's the original motivation, is to save lives here. It turns out there's a lot of other benefits to building self-driving cars. And so there's lots of other great reasons to do this, but really safety was first and foremost here. All right, so a bit of the history of Waymo. We have driven millions of miles on public roads. We're now doing about 1 million trips per week with real paying customers. We've done billions of miles in simulation. It might be up to tens of billions at this point. And we're operating in lots of cities. I'll show you a map later that kind of covers where we're operating at this point. All right. Oh, here we go. So as I mentioned, I live in San Francisco. Our first place that we launched a commercial service was in Chandler, Arizona. For those who have not been to the Phoenix area or don't know Chandler, it's like a pretty boring suburb. It's got these giant grid roads that are super wide. It was an easy place to start driving. We have worked our way up from there. Really, when we started driving in San Francisco was when, at least for me, that was the moment. Oh, this actually works, right? This is not just a toy demo. I mean, we were driving up and down 280 in 2009. And it looked really cool, and we can make cool videos, but to actually have a workable, safe, scalable product, it's a little harder than just driving up and down 280. So driving in San Francisco, that was sort of the watershed moment for the company. It showed, oh, this can actually work and be useful to people. Driving in San Francisco is not easy. I hate doing it. I avoid it as much as I can, but every once in a while I have to do it, and it's awful. There are a couple of places in America that are far from San Francisco, but not many. And since then, we've seen that the software we've built and the AI generalizes to other cities. When we first started driving in Los Angeles, we basically just took everything that we already had working in San Francisco, tried it in Los Angeles, and it mostly worked. There were a couple of things we needed to tune. We see that as we go to new cities, there are always a couple of things that are different in each new city. First and foremost would be emergency vehicles. They all have slightly different lights and different siren sounds and paint jobs on the ambulances or police cars. And so we have to adjust to that. The other thing that seems to change from city to city is traffic lights. You would think traffic lights are pretty much the same across America, but they're not. Every city's planner has some different idea about how they're going to do traffic lights, how they build the intersections. Sometimes they're horizontal, sometimes they use more arrows, sometimes they have like a weird looking thing, and you have to figure out what that means. So there's a couple of things we need to adapt to in each new city, and certainly as we go to international cities like London and Tokyo, we're starting to operate in, things are even more different, right? They drive on the left side of the road. And yet we've seen that the software we've built tends to generalize, and that just feeding it tons and tons of driving data and training ML models on this, it seems to generalize when we're driving these new cities with an incremental amount of work, not zero, but it's a manageable amount of work. So I won't walk you through all the cities, but there's lots of them. Not all of them are launched yet. The first three, Phoenix, San Francisco, and LA, we operate as a first-party market. So the Waymo app, you download from the App Store, just like Uber. But in places like Austin and Atlanta, we have partnership with Uber, where through the Uber app, you can get assigned to a Waymo. And this is an interesting experience because people are not necessarily expecting a robot. They're pulling out the Uber app and they're used to getting a human driver, and then a robot shows up the first time, and we need to very quickly educate them, set their expectations, teach them how to open the door. And that's something I'll talk a little bit about later, is how do we actually make a person feel comfortable? We can say we're safe with a bunch of statistics, but stepping into a robot is, can be scary for people for the first time if they've never had an experience like that. All right. Just a bunch of marketing videos interspersed here, but they're pretty good, so bear with me. This one.
Okay, what are we doing?
We're in our first ever Waymo.
And what does it mean when we're in a Waymo?
It means that there is nobody
driving this thing!
And this is a fully autonomous Waymo ride.
I cannot believe this. The car did a better job than if somebody was driving.
The truck was over the yellow line, so the Waymo braked and moved to the side.
It knew how to pronounce my name.
Oh my God. Look at this.
Oh, it's nice. I love it. This is new.
This is so cool.
I'll never forget this. Never.
So all that to say, people seem to like this, right? And that though they may be nervous at first, people get used to this pretty quickly. I've taken a lot of people on their first ride in a robot. Reactions can vary tremendously in the first 10, 30 seconds. Some people are super excited, some are nervous, some are terrified. 5 minutes later, every single person is looking at their phone. Right? That's what you want. You do not want this to be exciting. You want it to be boring and utilitarian while, feeling safe. And when I feel that we've achieved that. All right, so a bit of history. It's not like the idea of a self-driving car is new. People have been fantasizing this basically since we've had cars. A horse is self-driving to some extent, and we sort of lost to that as we asked people to turn cranks and pull steering wheels. And so this is an ad from a 1950s General Electric or General something, yeah. Just kind of showing that people have wanted to do this for a very long time. I would say it really began in earnest in 2004, I want to say. I'm going to get the dates a little mixed up, with the DARPA Grand Challenge. So DARPA, which is the research branch of the military, sponsored a contest that said, we want teams to enter and have a car drive completely autonomously with nobody in it at all through the desert for 150 miles. So they went to the Nevada desert and they had this crazy route, and they dropped very coarse waypoints. The teams were not allowed to drive this ahead of time. They didn't know the route, and several teams entered. The winning team, remember this was a 150-mile race. The winning team made it, I think, 11 miles, and then it went into a ditch and the tires caught on fire. So round one did not go well.
They didn't get 5 stars.
They did not get 5 stars. No. 2 years later, they ran another version of the Grand Challenge. Not to be daunted, this time Stanford entered. Guess who won? Stanford won, but actually, I think 3 or 5 teams ended up completing the entire race. So from the first year where tires on fire, nobody finished, nobody even got close to finishing, to 2 years later, multiple teams completing the race, Stanford winning. There's a great documentary from Nova on this. We don't need to watch it, but I find it entertaining. So that was really the start of things. Then they said, okay, great, robots are done. Let's do this again. The next one they did was called the DARPA Urban Challenge. And this is a very generous use of the word urban. They took an abandoned military base and sort of decorated it up like a suburb. and had cars interacting with each other. And so this was an additional layer of challenge. In this version, the cars were kept very far away from each other. This was sort of simulating Iraq, essentially, because that's what DARPA was interested in at the time. In the urban challenge, the cars had to navigate a parking lot and do four-way stops and yield to each other, right? The things that we ask a 16-year-old to do when they learn to drive, or I don't know when people learn to drive these days. I got my license at 15 because I'm from Mississippi. So that was also the world's first robot fender bender. So I think it was the MIT and Cornell teams ran into each other because one of the cars got stuck and the other one tried to go around, and then the other one ran into it. And these are the sorts of things you see as you have sort of emergent robot on robot interactions. It's something we have to worry about as well. We are now a decent chunk of the traffic in San Francisco, not double-digit percentages, but enough that Waymo on Waymo interactions is a real thing. So we had the world's first robot collision. Then DARPA stepped back and said, okay, we've probably done enough here. And that's when Google stepped in. So Larry and Sergey, the founders of Google, got very interested in this stuff. They were attending all of these challenges, and they decided to hire all these people and bring them in and start the Google self-driving car project, which is now called Waymo. That's around the time that I joined. My boss, one of the CEOs, was a Stanford postdoc at the time, came over. Several Stanford people came over, several CMU people. They took the best people who'd worked on these challenges and decided to make a company out of it. It has taken longer than we thought. It's now 16 and a half years later, and we finally have a working product. It's great, but I don't think any of us thought it was going to take 16 years when we started. So a bit of the history. We started out by doing these difficult 100-mile runs around the Bay Area. So Larry and Sergey sat down, drew some lines on the map, and said, this looks hard. Why don't you do this? And the goal was that we had to drive them end to end without touching the steering wheel. An example of this would be about half of them were the worst possible ways to drive between Mountain View and San Francisco. So as an example, one of them was to drive down El Camino, which involved, I think, 192 traffic lights, right? So each one of these we staged, and they had to add like a slight additional challenge. The first one was easy but terrifying. It was to drive down Highway 1 when it worked, the Pacific Coast Highway, and it's not very challenging. You're just kind of driving a windy road with a cliff next to you, and I think there was one stop. So that was the easiest one. The hardest one in the end was to do all of the bridges across the Bay Area, and then to drive, oh, sorry, that was the next last one. That was quite hard, to go through all the bridges in the Bay Area. And the last one was to drive up one through Pacifica and through the Presidio in San Francisco, down Lombard Street. So all of these were pretty challenging, but we nailed them all within like 18 months. We also had to drive 100,000 miles. Turns out that's really easy. You just go up and down 280. That's no problem. So those are the first challenges. And we said, okay, great. We have accomplished our thing. We got a nice pat on the back. What next, right? This was clearly still not a product. So we had to figure out what to do next. And unfortunately, I don't have slides on this, so I'll just kind of vocalize through it. The first product we tried to build was a driver assistance technology on freeways. And we thought, okay, well, driving up and down 280 was easy. Let's make a product out of this. And so we took the technology and we added some UI elements to make this a little more human friendly. And we said, okay, we're going to lend this to some Google employees. We're going to say, okay, please be careful. This is an experimental technology. It looks like it can do everything, but it can't. Right? You're ready to take over it. So you encounter something that the car can handle. An example of something that it couldn't handle at the time would have been a construction zone, or police closing the freeway, or a horse running through the interstate. Who knows what? Right? We told people, please watch out for this thing. And these were Google employees. And we sat them down and we said, please pay attention. And what we saw was they did not do that. Right? Some did, but we saw plenty of evidence that people were trusting the technology too much. And I'll talk a little bit about the levels of autonomy in a second. But this sort of scared us off of the partial autonomy path, which other companies have embraced. But we decided at the time that that was not the path for us. What we really wanted to build was an end-to-end autonomous system that a child could use, or a blind person could use, or a drunk person, right? That there's no responsibility for driving on passenger, because what we saw is that the handoff between the machine and the human was a much harder problem than we anticipated, and I think that a lot of people anticipated. And maybe you could eventually solve this, but we didn't think that that was, the brass ring to shoot for. We wanted end-to-end autonomy, what's called level 4. All right. And with that realization, we pivoted back to building an end-to-end autonomous system. The first one we did was this like cute bubble car, which probably most of you have not seen. I think they might have one at the Computer History Museum, called the Firefly. And this was the first time that people were going to be seeing an empty robot on public roads. And you can imagine if we had made it like a giant black SUV with tinted windows with nobody in it, that might have been terrifying to people. But this was the first time people were going to be encountering a robot, and with nobody in it that, was very heavy and could move somewhat fast. And so we wanted to make it cute and approachable. And we also put additional safety features into it. The entire front of that car was made out of foam, so that if it did hit somebody, which thankfully it never did, we've now retired those vehicles, that it would have absorbed a lot of the impact and not hurt the person nearly as much as if it had had, a hard metal front like you see on a regular car. Since then, we've launched Waymo, what used to be called Waymo 1, but is now just called Waymo, in Chandler, expanded to multiple cities, and hey, now we got a real product. All right, so I mentioned these levels of autonomy. These are defined by SAE, which is an automotive standards organization. These are numeric, but that can be misleading, right? There is a temptation to believe that if we assign numbers to something, that there is a natural progression from 0 to 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. That's not necessarily the case. And the people writing this, were sitting at a desk in 2009 or something and sort of guessing at what the future of this technology would be. We are now operating at level 4. So level 4 is highly autonomous. That means that the car can drive itself completely by itself within a defined operating design domain. And that means that you pick some conditions, and the conditions could be San Francisco, or it could be not raining, or it could be on surface streets, but not on the freeway. So you pick some criteria that you allow yourself to drive on, and you can do that, end to end without any human supervision. That's level 4. Level 5 is if you remove all those conditions. You can just drive anywhere a human being can, including like the back roads of Alaska. Probably gonna be a while before we get to that. I don't know that anyone's ever going to really do L5, but it does have a definition. Now, 1, 2, and 3 are the other interesting ones that we don't dabble in, but you might have seen other companies in. Level 1 is just cruise control, right? Like very basic, it does something. Level 2 is what you can get on cars today, and that is autonomy, but the human needs to be ready to take over if the system makes a mistake, that the human is responsible for the driving, even if they're not actively doing the driving. And this is where we saw that there was a real problem in how we're doing the human-machine handoff. Level 3 is level 2, but you get a heads up. And it's not clear that anyone has really achieved this. There are some companies that claim they have done it in some circumstances, but the idea that maybe you could read a book while the car is driving and you're in the driver's seat, but that it says beep, 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 in 30 seconds, I would like you to start driving yourself. Please put the book down. That's a very hard problem, right? It requires seeing very far in advance, predicting the future well enough to know what you can't do, which, as you've probably learned from some of these AIs, is a hard problem. So I don't know that anyone's really achieved level 3 where there's all that practical, right? And so it may be that jumping from 2 to 4, or even just heading straight for 4, as we did, is the only realistic path. All right, so on to those safety statistics. So we mentioned lots of people are dying. We are starting to make a real dent in that problem, even though we are at small scale. So there's been independent analysis of our safety statistics. We have to report every fender bender to the government, multiple governments, and we've had independent analysis of all of these accidents. And this is not just a naive counting exercise. There isn't like this oracle of perfect data about how human beings have crashes. All of these come from police reports or reports to the government and car recalls. So even getting the baseline for human driving is quite hard. We have very good numbers about fatalities. If someone dies, the government keeps very good records. If 2 cars have a fender bender at a red light and they exchange $100 and move on, there's no record of that, right? So there is no oracle of human collisions, right? That we do the best we can, we extrapolate, and then we compare it to the robot statistics where we have really good statistics. We know absolutely everything that's ever happened to these cars. And to the best of our knowledge and verified by third-party experts who are good at this, we have made drastic reductions in collisions. We have so serious injury, huge reduction in these airbag collisions, which are, one step less severe, even more. And then particularly with pedestrian accidents, we are just way better than human drivers. So this is looking really good. People can find things to nitpick about, and as I hope I've communicated, these statistics are inherently a little muddy. People are doing their best, and our statistics are really good. It's the human statistics that you compare to that are actually quite hard. One statistic people throw out is that there is a human fatality every 100 million miles of driving. We are just around that threshold of our own driving, and it's actually kind of hard to make that comparison. There have been fatalities that involved Waymos, but the Waymos were sitting still. So the first one was we were stopped at a multi-car red light. A Tesla driven by a human was going 90 miles per hour on the streets of San Francisco and had a 5-car collision and someone died. How do you count that accident in the statistics is actually kind of a hard question. And so we do not have direct fatality statistics that we can compare to. And I just wanted to kind of communicate that it's actually kind of a hard problem doing the statistics of collisions. All right, moving on, I'll talk a little bit about the hardware. So we have lots of sensors on the car. Initially, people found them ugly, but I think people have gotten kind of used to this. And there's, it is a very identifiable product. So I'll talk a little bit about the sensors we do have, go into some detail. So the most obvious is the LiDAR. So this is a laser range finding system. It gives you a 3D point cloud. I'll show an example of that later. This is really the workhorse of the system. Working off of 3D point clouds gives you structured data, and it's very easy for a machine learning model to look at those points, say, those points are really close together and look a whole lot like a bicycle. It's probably a bicycle. Super valuable. We actually have multiple LiDARs scattered around the car. There's one really long range one on top of the car, it spins, and there are smaller ones in the corners. We also have cameras. Those are useful for a couple of things. At this point, we're fusing all of these sensors together through a multimodal AI. I'll talk a little about that later. But even in the early days of the system, you need cameras for a couple of things. In particular, telling if a light is red or green requires color, and none of these other systems see color, so you need cameras. But it's also useful for corroborating things. If you see something that looks kind of like a bicycle, but you're not quite sure, you can check with camera image and see if they match up. And the last major sensor we have is the radar. Radar is fantastic because it gives you a couple extra measurements. You do a direct measurement of velocity via the Doppler effect, and so you can tell exactly how fast something is moving towards away from you. It can also see through other objects. So if you're at a stack of cars at a red light, radar can actually see through the box truck in front of you and tell if the cars in front of it are moving, even though no other sensor could poke through the car, through that truck. And then last, we use microphones. These are particularly useful for detecting sirens. We actually need to localize the sirens to say, oh, there's an ambulance to my left, right? So those are the sensors. And just to give you an example here, so this is terrifying. So here you see I think some kids wearing black at night chasing their cats into the road. And the obvious thing you can see in this is they're really hard to see with your eyes, right? Because they're wearing black at night. They probably should not have run after the cats, but thankfully the thing in their way was a Waymo, and it stopped appropriately. Here's what it looks like in LiDAR, right? So this is a 3D point cloud. The child is very obvious in this view of things. And so if you build a vision-only system, maybe you can get it to work. But building a vision plus LiDAR plus radar plus microphone system is much more robust and lets us catch things like this. And it's one reason we have such great safety performance. This is what radar ends up looking like. This is the exact same view, and you can see humans are full of water, and water has a very good radar signature, and you can see them moving and their velocity. So combining all of the systems together, we had a very clear view of these kids, and that's why we stopped so quickly. If we'd only relied on the camera, it would be a much harder problem. Not to say impossible, but just much harder. All right, and then, oh yeah.
So my understanding is the way that Waymo approached of sensing was quite different than how Tesla has approached it. If they're off-road, they got there earlier was because of that choice. So can you talk a little bit about the difference in strategy or like yeah, how those two technologies are different?
Sure. So we try to avoid talking about specific competitors, but if a company were to build a camera-only system, someone, they have a much harder problem, right? And they have a different goal they were trying to solve, which is selling cars to humans in 2016, right? When LiDARs were incredibly expensive, when the GPUs to run these models were not as robust, the ML had not made it as far. And so that may have made sense for them at the time, but it is a much harder problem. We have just seen over and over that there is tremendous value in combining all these sensors, and we constantly try removing them, right? And so one thing you can do with an ML system is ablate some of the inputs and say, well, what if I had that scene but no camera? Or what if I had that scene but no radar? And you see how the system performs as you delete certain sensor inputs, and LiDAR is just incredibly valuable. And when we started this project, LiDARs were incredibly flaky and incredibly expensive. Like they were maybe $100,000 and they broke every 3 months. At this point, we're building our own LiDARs. We have manufacturing partners, but we've brought the cost down tremendously. We don't talk about the exact costs, but this is not as big a deal as it used to be. And they're just incredibly valuable. So that's sort of the main thrust of why we've taken this approach and why we're somewhat skeptical about these other things. You as a human can drive with 2 eyeballs. This is clearly possible with enough intelligence, but it's easier if you've got these other things. And so why would you not do that? The other one that comes up a lot is maps. So we build incredibly detailed maps, like down to, we know how high the curb is and where there's a pothole and cracks and speed bumps. We know everything. And some might see that as a crutch, but there's also another valuable input into the system. And if it's not that much effort to build it, why not do it? That doesn't mean that we slavishly rely on the map. The map could be wrong. Maybe they're digging a hole and the map is just not representing reality anymore. But that is still a simpler problem than figuring everything out from scratch when you first get there. We say, I think there's supposed to be some white paint here, but actually there's a big hole. Something weird is going on, right? And so the car can learn to act more conservatively if the world does not match expectations, which is a much easier problem than figuring out your expectations from scratch every time you open your eyes. Right? If I had dumped you in the middle of Singapore and said, good luck, drive, you would probably have some problems. But if I, showed you a lot of videos about driving in Singapore and some maps, you'd probably do a better job. I don't know that I would agree. So back to the hardware. What you don't see here is a lot of compute stuff, right? Our first cars, like the janked up Priuses we were using, had lots of wires and computers in the back. But this is a real product that we want people to put their luggage in. And so all that stuff is buried in under where the spare tire would go. It's quite well integrated. And maintaining these is actually like a very big source of operational cost and efficiency work. Turns out once you have a working robot, it doesn't just take care of itself. There are human beings who need to fill the tires with air, clean up the garbage, return someone's lost iPhone, and just operationalizing all of that also involves a lot of AI and optimization software. So it's a real product and we don't want it to ugly up too much. All right, so now onto the slides that I first saw 30 minutes ago, but I do have an idea of how this all works. So just a sense of like how the software system works. There's a couple of pieces here. The first thing is, as I mentioned, we have a map. We need to figure out where we are on the map. That's called localization. And generally GPS is okay as a start, but as I'm sure you guys have noticed, GPS on your phone is not amazing all the time, and it'll put you on the wrong side of the street or inside a building or something. It's particularly bad when you're in an urban canyon, like in downtown San Francisco, because the GPS is bouncing across those buildings and you don't get a clear path with satellites. So we look for features on the map and we look for features on the ground and we compare them. We say, oh, there's a tree over there that's 8 feet wide, whatever it is. I see one of those on my map. I must be exactly right here. So that's the localization process. Once we have that, we use the sensor data in a system called perception, which takes all that sensor data and turns it into something more structured. In the past, that was very structured data. We would say, there is a bicycle right here. It is 2 meters tall and it is going 10 miles per hour northeast. We still have that, right? But we are moving towards more of a system where there are high dimensional embeddings representing all this information, and that we're communicating information that doesn't quite make sense to a human being, but that is useful for solving the driving problem. And I imagine you guys have covered this in some of the AI content you guys have looked at. The structured representation that we as humans can represent is limiting, right? We don't reason about uncertainty or inaccuracy as well as a computer might fed enough data. And so we're moving towards more representations that have the ability to represent ambiguity. When we have all of that, we then figure out where to drive. And that is the planning process. And ultimately that just turns into turning the steering wheel, gas, brake, blinkers, like, you know, basic stuff. But where you want to drive is a multi-dimensional problem that involves space and time. And this is actually quite complicated. You can imagine if you were on a freeway and trying to merge to the left with some fast moving traffic, it requires predicting where these other cars are going to be in the future, how they're going to react to you as a driver. This is actually a quite complicated system. And AI is invaluable here. All right, just some fun videos of why this is all super hard. So every one of these we have seen while driving. I think a lot of these end up being in San Francisco, but we see problems everywhere. And we handle most of these completely autonomously. I'll talk a little bit about the human input we have into the system, but I think every one of these we probably completely autonomously, and it's just really hard. But this is the long tail, and why if you see a company that shows a cool video of them driving in a city, that's not enough, right? You really need to see all these long tail cases and be driving millions of miles before you have a good grip on what you haven't solved yet. All right, so I talked a little bit about the general software stack, and just to expand on that, perception, you guys, I think you've talked about transformers and large language models. You can think of perception as the encoder. So it is taking a bunch of pixels and radar returns and all sorts of things and boiling that down into a lower dimensional representation that is more useful to another system, right? And that lower dimensional representation could just be, here's a box, it's a bicycle, it's going 10 miles per hour, or it could be an embedding, something that, you know, captures more nuance than we're able to express by just writing like a JSON struct. Behavior and motion planning is taking that condensed input from the perception system and then coming up with a trajectory. And a trajectory is just a path through space and time that we can turn into gas, brake, throttle, steering. But it also has to predict the future, right? We see what other agents are doing. We have to predict if they're gonna cross the road, if it's a pedestrian, is someone trying to turn into their driveway? Are they gonna let us in if we try to move? So the planning system has to reason about that stuff, either explicitly or implicitly. And one of the themes here is that it used to be a lot more explicit than it is currently. That you start out with these very structured representations and say, I am quite certain that that box is a pedestrian and they're going to cross the street in 3 seconds. That is a very valuable representation. It got us pretty far, but it does not contain as much nuance as you as a human being watching that person. You reason about the uncertainty of what that person might do, or, oh, looks like they dropped something. Maybe they're not going to cross right away, but who knows. And then we also rely a lot on AI in our simulator. We test absolutely everything in simulation. There are a couple of things that we really have to test in the real world because they're just too complex to simulate. Like we have a closed, we have an abandoned military base that we lease in like near Modesto, I think. And that's where we do real world testing of things that are not safe to test on public roads, or that are too hard to test in simulation. And an example would be like throwing baby dolls in front of the car and seeing if it stops, right? Or someone kind of zooming in on a skateboard, like to intentionally see if the car will stop. We also do a lot of synthetic weather testing there. We have like a rain chamber where we're testing, how well does the car handle really heavy rain. But the workhorse of how we get things done is synthetic simulation. We run very massive cloud jobs that are simulating everything. And if you are an engineer tweaking how we yield the bicycles, we don't just take your change and go drive next to a bunch of bicycles. That would not be the responsible thing to do. Instead, we run it through millions of miles of simulation and synthetic bicycles. But then we need to hypothesize what the bicycle would do, right? And it then becomes this cat and mouse game between one simulation and one pretend robot trying to interact with each other. And it gets quite complicated, but it's one reason we've been as successful as we have been is all the investment here. All right, just a bit of the history of how we've used machine learning. The very early days when we were doing those 100-mile routes and driving up down 280, there was basically zero machine learning. It was a very heuristic-based system. There was a lot of classic robotics algorithms in there. I think there might have been a little bit of computer vision to detect traffic lights, but it was, is there a bunch of red here, kind of histogram stuff, nothing very complicated. And this was 2009 or so, before deep nets were a thing. But very soon after, AlexNet was like the first GPU-based deep net. It was super valuable. Alex actually taught me ML at Waymo. Right after that, we started using deep nets. It was a game changer. Of course, it didn't work terribly well at the very beginning. There was no such thing as an automotive-grade GPU. We were just kind of trying to shove some hardware into a car and hope that the solder stayed on. But it showed a lot of promise. And we've really been on the bleeding edge of these things as technology has progressed. At this point, everything is a transformer pretty much, as basically everything you guys are looking at is a transformer. They're just so amazing. And we've, gone on the journey from basic convolutional nets to transformers to VLMs and LLMs, and now building our own foundation models that are autoencoders and just take a bunch of unstructured data and then the fine-tuning step, very similar to how the large frontier labs train there. All right. This slide, oh, there's my wife. All right, stay tuned. Okay. All right. I don't remember what I was supposed to say on this slide, so I'm going to skip it. All right. So this is just repeating the encoder decoder spiel, so I'm going to skip over that one. All right. And then on simulation. So here's what we need to be able to do in simulation. We know what the scene looked like when we drove in the first place. So we collect lots of logs, like astonishingly large byte numbers worth of logs. I'm not allowed to say the number, but it's just stupidly large. I want to emphasize that. But that just tells us what actually happened. But what we want to know is what might have happened if the software made this other move. What if we had stayed at the traffic light a little bit longer? What if we merged to the left? And to do that, we need a bunch of hypotheticals about what the world could have looked like. And there are two big pieces of technology we need to use here. One is figuring out what the scene looked like. So this is an image of San Francisco where we're able to pan the camera, move around, change the lighting situations. This is very valuable if we want to replay the exact same situation, but it's raining, or it's dark, or there's sun glare, right? Because we need to test the limits of the system. The other thing we need to do is to build highly intelligent synthetic agents, right? So if I cut this guy off, is he going to let him or not? So tremendously complicated stuff. All right, so with all of that, we're now in multiple cities, and the next frontier in terms of Waymo are really two things. So one is driving on freeways. We are doing a little bit of that with employees at this point and hope to launch it to regular customers at some point in the near future. I've ridden in it myself. It's really like a game changer that you're sitting in the back of a car by yourself and can take a nap and not worry about the guy up front, watch a movie, take a phone call. It's a very different experience. And the surface street thing is cool, but doing it on freeways is really a game changer. And then snow is the other thing that, the last frontier of driving is really handling inclement weather. We already do a lot of things. We were very conservative driving in rain at the very beginning of the project. When we first launched the service, we would, disable the entire fleet when it started raining more than like a small drizzle. At this point, we operate through very heavy rain, right? We had some problems recently. Phoenix had severe flooding, and the cars did not uniformly handle that perfectly. But we're quite close to handling rain thoroughly, right? Anywhere that you as a person would drive, we can seem to handle in terms of rain. Snow is a work in progress, though we've made a lot of progress on it, right? And so there's a couple of things that are challenging about snow. One is seeing, right? For those of you who have driven in snow, like at some point it's whiteout conditions. It is impossible to see. This is a really good use case for radar. Radar is not subject to snow in the same way that LiDAR and cameras are, right? They operate in different wavelengths, photons, and it just seems to work better. The other is how you actually drive in snow. There's the traction and control part of this, like as your tires start to slip and you can't steer quite right. That's hard, but in terms of problems we have, it's not the hardest, right? Computers are actually quite good at this sort of thing. But the other problem with driving in snow, I don't have a lot of experience driving in snow myself, is knowing where to drive, right? As the road becomes covered in snow, where's the lane is no longer quite as clear cut as it would be in clear weather. So that's another thing we need to figure out as we drive through these situations. We're now building the 6th generation driver, which is on a new vehicle platform. You may have seen some of these driving in San Francisco at this point. And this one really is aimed at cold weather, among other things. We also did a lot of cost down and tried to integrate into the vehicle better. I've ridden this vehicle. It is more legroom than I've ever seen in any car. It's not the main selling point, but just want to point it out. All right, what's this video? Yeah, another scary one. All right, scooter down. If there were a human driver falling behind that scooter, there's a very high likelihood that person would be dead. But the Waymo driver is always paying attention. We operate at about, I think, 10 hertz and looking 360 degrees, and we're just very good at predicting these sorts of things. All right, and there's yet another view of all the crazy things we end up driving through. And I think I'm going to get into the more human-centered part of this soon. Oh yeah, this is one of our depots. This kind of shows what it takes to get 100 cars on the road every day, multiple times a day. So as I said, we have giant parking lots full of robots. They're all electric vehicles, and so there's a limited number of high voltage chargers that they need to use. There's a giant optimization problem when you want to charge the cars. We'd obviously like every single car to be on the road Friday at 6 p.m. when everyone's going to restaurants and bars. That's like the peak time for running a transportation service. But we can't have them all charging their batteries at 4 p.m. because we don't have that many chargers. So there's a giant optimization problem of when do we charge the cars? How do we do this? If someone vomited in a car, when do we detect that? How do we clean it? There's just a large, complicated space of operating a service. And this is something that I think our competitors or alleged competitors are not quite realizing yet. This part is quite hard. And it's one of the things my team works on. All right. Okay. Now I want to talk a little bit about how humans interact with the cars and help them out. So we can get in some pretty complicated situations, and it would be great if the software just handled absolutely everything. And I think we will get there at some point. But if we waited for that point, we would never have launched anything. And so there are some cases where the car needs help, and we will call out to, sort of the phone your friend thing and say, please, I need help. What do I do here? And is this a crutch? Absolutely. But it is a very useful and, manageable cost crutch that provides a lot of value to the system. I want to point out every video you're seeing here does not involve human intervention. These are all things that the car did by itself, but just kind of shows the long tail. And 5 years ago, we probably would have involved human intervention for at least some of these things, not the last minute swerve. That's not something we would let humans do. But we have a Q&A system. And as we approach a situation the car knows it doesn't understand, it can ask for help. And an example would be if we see a traffic cop gesturing, we actually handle a large number of these gestures. But if the situation is just too complicated, too ambiguous, the system doesn't understand it, it can ask for help from a human being remotely. Here's a somewhat stylized view of what that ends up looking like. So we're stuck in a traffic stack. That's a fire truck. What are we supposed to do here? This is maybe too much to ask for an AI-only system to handle. And so we can ask a question to a human being and say, what should I do here? And if this happens at low volume enough, and we always have the car making sure that it doesn't hit things, right? So the human being is answering questions, not driving with a joystick. This is a great assist to the system. The other thing that's not as obvious is that having the system let you tune where you are on the precision recall curve for all the rest of your systems. You guys covered precision recall or no? Okay. Any given AI system will make mistakes, right? And but you can pick where you want to operate on the mistakes. Do you want to get more yeses when the answer is no, or do you want to get more no's when the answer is yes? It sort of depends on what the question is and what your tolerance is. But if we know that there's a human backup behind all of this, then we can pick a different point on that curve and accept slightly more of one kind of error because we know there's a human who can handle the situation. All right, and here's an example of this in actual practice. So this is in Los Angeles. There's a giant truck and a van blocking this. What do we do here? The system by itself would probably not be able to handle this, but a human has drawn that green trajectory up there and said, we should slot in up. Okay, then it gets even more complicated. So the human being has drawn this trajectory for us to drive that path. maybe our system can handle this autonomously at this point. Actually, you know, when I show these videos a year later, often the system is now capable of doing it. But at this point in time, at least, it was very valuable to have human input into the system. All right, I'm gonna see another map. Lots of cities, starting international. Okay, so talking about the product itself, and how do we get humans comfortable in the system? I mentioned that some people can feel scared at first. Can we make them feel comfortable? We put a lot of effort into it. One of the more amusing things we do is we basically play elevator music, like spa music, as you get in the car for the first time. If you find it annoying, you can turn it off. But what we've seen is that for people who have never been in this before, it calms them down a lot. Like that's the whole point of elevator music and spa music, is to calm you down. And it works. And then if we don't play that, and you're just sitting in the robot in silence, you're kind of looking at the screen, trying to see if it's making mistakes or, let's see the bicycle. But this gets people to relax. It's been very valuable. We also do a lot of work with disability groups. They're one of the prime customers here, right? Because many of them are unable to drive, and this is an opportunity for them to have independence. In a way, like America is a very car-based culture. You know, even in places like San Francisco, it's kind of hard to get around if you're blind or in a wheelchair, and having these things provides a lot of accessibility. Yep.
How's your accessibility different than Uber or Lyft?
Yeah, well, the problem is a lot harder, right? Uber and Lyft have a human being with eyeballs who can sort of see you and recognize that you might need help or that you can't see them. We have to solve all of that through an app or through the car. And so we have things like you can hit the button to make the car honk, right? And that helps people find it. We also have walking navigation to get to the car that we can give to people. So there's a couple of things we do, and you know, the lack of a human being is a pro in a lot of cases, but in terms of the very beginning and very end of a trip, the human does provide some value that is a lot of work to replicate in an AI system. We also do a lot of work with first responders. This is and then we do like lots of fun, cute things because this is just transportation, right? I ride this with my son all the time. It's great that we sit in the back. He likes looking at all the fun stuff, and we read Harry Potter in the back seat. It's just a different experience than if I were driving him myself and I'm in the front seat and he's in the back seat in the booster. Like it's not the same, right? And so this provides a lot of value to people. It's not obvious when we just talk about AI and robots, right? This is a very personal thing, and it helps people live their lives. All right, I think I'm gonna, yeah, we do airports now. Airports are super hard. I'm sure you guys know that if you've ever driven to an airport. But we've been operating in Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix for quite a while. We just got permission to start driving San Jose Airport, and we are making steady progress with the San Francisco Airport, which is sort of the gold trophy there. But airports are quite hard, and it's something we're still working on. And I think that's the end of my slides.